Book 2 Section 25 Fat Charlie stank. Because he could. Fat Charlie came from a very different background to Rubben Shuffle. The lack of direction in Rubben's childhood led him to a life of crime, whereas the failings of a near-perfect youth caused Fat Charlie to go down the same road. Fat Charlie doesn't give much away. From time to time snippets of his past are thrown out to selected members of the audience, so this attempted biography is the work of nearly a decade's compiling tidbits from the man himself. As with Rubben, an exact date of birth has not been forthcoming, but we assume that Fat Charlie is now on the wrong side of 50. It may be harder to judge an exact age due to the obese nature of his frame, though most people concur on the idea of between 50 and 60. The story begins, not surprisingly, in his childhood, an idyllic period for the boy and the family. The then thin Charlie was a model student in the peaceful northern village where he was brought up. No concrete information has been given as to the name of this village, or even the province where it was located, so technically it could be anywhere north of Gine up to where the mountains give way to the Cantabrian Sea. With Fat Charlie, you take the information you get and don't ask for more. When he realizes he is giving you information is when he stops. Charlie was a bright, young lad, raised in a traditional and devout, Catholic family. His beliefs were strong even from a young age, and delighted in Bible reading with his parents, even going as far as putting on little plays in the garden with his friends to recount the good work of the Lord. His work at school was excellent too, with tutors recommending him for scholarships in mathematics or any sphere he wished to excel in. Charlie, though, was convinced and drawn towards theology. He referred to it as his calling, and his parents were the proudest people around when he finished his exams with top marks and entered the seminary. Charlie was only 17 when he entered, though already boasted a formidable reputation based on his extensive knowledge of all things godly. As was typical in the place, he was assigned a mentor, Padre Gregorio. PG was a rather forward-thinking member of the clergy for the time, believing that exclusion wasn't helping anyone and that the church would have to modernize if it wanted to remain a relevant voice in the latter part of the 20th century. Charlie and El Padre formed an instant rapport, with the trivial matter of Charlie's scholastic education needing to be terminated soon dealt with. Charlie was ready to embark on the next level of his theological training, culminating in writing a thesis with his mentor. Padre Gregorio was a tough taskmaster, wizened and hardened by continually receiving young charges below the standard he expected. He had become tired of the sycophants that wandered into his sphere of learning, eagerly agreeing and heartily nodding to an utterance that passed his lips, whilst PG grew more and more bored at the desperate situation that the church seemed to be heading towards. Gregorio believed that all this was for some greater cause and wanted his apprentices not only to see this vision, but to share and live it. The fact that they all claimed to was not enough for the big man, who instantly knew from the looks on their faces that the positive signals emitted vocally were disguising the confusion held within. With Charlie things were different. He had a thirst for knowledge that was unquestionable, but was also prepared to quench that thirst alone, and, despite his young age, hold the occasional theological cocktail party where thirsty clergy could drink at the table of wisdom. From this work together there developed a friendship based around mutual respect and competitive challenging. El Padre was continually testing Charlie with his own vision of the big picture, to which he responded equally, and at times beyond. PG had seen many potential young hopefuls break down and cry at this point, but Charlie relished the opportunity. As he progressed through his education, achieving awards and fame for the seminary that called for the services of the engraver on more than occasion, Charlie and Padre Gregorio began work on what was to be their groundbreaking project, Charlie's thesis on the role of the church in the latter part of the bloodiest and most violent century in our history and how to make the next one a little less so. Charlie was an idealistic, young priest, but he was not naive, far from it. He caused a lot of chin-rubbing within the more conservative section of the cloister, yet always managed to formulate arguments with sufficient verbosity and conviction that those in the doubting corner would always give him that essential yes at the end. In the parish his work was equally above the call of duty, always finding time for the many causes that found their way to his doorstep. Their work was groundbreaking in attracting the disillusioned youth to the church, organizing programs of community aid so that all members of the old as far as the eye could see were involved. Charlie saw that people did not always like the overly in-your-face aspect that the church sometimes, albeit unwillingly, thrust upon people. Charlie was quick to realize that people quite often disliked Christians, especially young ones with acoustic guitars and smiles. The world wasn't about happiness. Charlie knew that and knew how to make people see his vision without having the word cheese appear in their subconscious. Charlie put in long days and fell into bed exhausted, yet content every night. When not helping the community, Padre Gregorio and Charlie worked on a thesis. It was taking longer than expected due to their commitments in the parish, as well as having to go to neighboring parishes to oversee projects initiated and inspired by their good work. It became something like an ecclesiastical supermarket opening ceremony as the pair became famous all over the north. At every stop on the Camino de Santiago, everyone knew the good work done by these two saints in waiting. Charlie tried to delegate work to others so that he would have more time for the thesis, but he couldn't stay away. It wasn't that he didn't trust others to do his work, rather that he found the successful execution of his duties an irresistible narcotic, though perfectly legal and more fun, surely, than any synthetic drug. So the thesis dragged on. Finding time to work together was proving even more complicated, and chapters were rewritten individually, with the idea brain finding some time together in the summer in order to put everything together. Charlie found it hard to contain himself when he was inspired in his writing, especially now that he was writing alone, and after one particularly fine moment of religious pondering, Charlie felt he had to share it with the man who, he considered, had converted him into an apostle of goodness, and closer to God. Not that Charlie was doing this for some sort of recognition, but it filled him with pride to know that when he finished he would have been in many ways an important cog in the wheel that had turned Padre Gregorio's life's work into reality. He had had the opportunity to work with one of the finest in the game, and had learnt so much from him, whilst at the same time Charlie knew that this was not mere adoration, rather a partnership based on mutual respect and the motivation to do the best for this wretched world. Charlie thought about the look on Gregorio's face as the awards came flooding in, the good that could be done with the cash prizes, how the vision could be extended. Their material sacrifice was more than compensated by the closeness of the realization of their dream. Maybe that summer everything could be tied up, then only having to confirm the visits of archbishops. Charlie began to feel bad about letting his mind wander thus. That was not the idea behind their force. Was this another form of materialism? He decided to discuss this matter with El Pard. He was headed in that direction anyway, with what he felt was a rather impressive second draft of the last chapter. Padre Gregorio had always made it clear that he did not like to be disturbed in his private chambers. It was where he could reflect on his work, rest and gain strength to continue his mission. He said that he needed this space in order to expand his vision and find the means to put it into practice. Charlie had always respected this, but felt that this moment warranted a minor infraction of the rules. He also had a rather fine bottle of Rabira del Duero that he had been saving for such an occasion, and knew that PG, the good Catholic that he was, would accept the grape as a form of appeasement. Charlie prepared his excuses as he entered the building, knowing that he would nervously trip his tongue over every word as eloquence deserted him in favor of haste. There would be time for such wordplay. Now it was their moment, the master and the pupil, but now the pupil was a master too, the culmination of a life's work. As he got closer to the quarters he noticed the door ajar and could not resist surprising the old master, whom he expected to be engrossed in some medieval manuscript, disproving theories and righting wrongs. Charlie gave the door a push and shouted, elatedly, "I have it." Before his eyes was something that would prove something of a contretemps in the pair's working relationship. Charlie observed speechless as the man who had given him the strength to believe in all the good work they had done was upright, eyes closed, whilst being filleted by an altar boy who could not have seen more than 12 summers. The look on his eyes told the story of a boy who had come to meet God, but unfortunately got the wrong door. Charlie saw 2 other boys lined up, and knew he would not need the services of Larry's detectives to ascertain their fate. In slow motion he dropped the bottle, causing PG to stir. He just looked at Charlie and shrugged his shoulders before asking him what he expected. Charlie was asked if he would mind closing the door upon his swift exit. For moments time stood still. Charlie was outside El Padre's quarters trying to make sense of the situation that he had just discovered. He wanted to vomit, but the contents of his stomach remained in place. He wanted to end the crestfallen and deplorable life of his now former mentor. He tried to comprehend things within the sphere of the big picture. He couldn't. Everything meant nothing. He had been fooled and was sure that if he scratched the surface he would open more doors and find more old cocks in young mouths. He did what people do when they don't know what to do. He ran. In no specific direction, just away. He ran for hours, then realized he would need to plan a trifle more. All his beliefs had been proven to be nothing more than a masquerade. Everything he had worked for was a farce, because the people he was about to give the speech of recognition to would prefer something he was now too old to give. He would find a new way to live his life, a way that would please him, and if this had the effect of displeasing the rest of the world, then that was a small price to pay. He would need funds. This would require a visit to PG. Charlie offered him the possibility of a lump sum. He soon regretted using the word lump to pay for his silence. El Padre responded by claiming no one would believe him and that the door was over there, insinuating it was time to stop being a silly prude and to visit the real world. Charlie had expected PG to be repentant. This was not the case. Finances would not be forthcoming. Charlie pondered. He could not stay around for too long, as he knew it was all a lie. That said, he assumed that if Gregorio was prepared to renounce his chastity vows in favor of being a hideous, lying pervert, then perhaps his views on materialism were also equally venal. Obviously, he could not hoard money in a bank, so his quarters must have some sort of secret stash. They were both due at a conference in Santander the next day, though Charlie stayed home, claiming to be unwell. Gregorio was happy to go alone, informing Charlie that he expected him back to his old ways upon his return. Charlie told him not to worry, biting his tongue as the words caused him heartburn. With PG away and assuming Charlie has accepted the situation, all Charlie needed to do was break into the filthy swine's quarters and misappropriate the loot. Access was gained without force, as the keykeeper believed Charlie had to collect some important documents. Charlie looked under the mattress, inside the teapot, in other places that a comedy thief might find their reward, but to no avail. Charlie sat in the swivel chair. Suddenly everything in the room had perverse sexual connotations, and saw a picture of Padre Gregorio on the wall, proudly standing with his prize winning. What was the prize, though? Group of choir boys. He removed the picture and found a secret cupboard behind it. Inside were bundles of notes and deeds for a property in the Caribbean. It seemed that PG was waiting for the cash from the thesis to pay it off and then retire in the sun. Charlie decided on a change of plan. He took the money and left the deeds on the table with a note saying, "One day I'll come back and kill you." He left. He claimed he was going for a walk. Caught a bus to a Coruña on the Galician coast, entered an outfitter's and said goodbye to the collar for the last time. He opened a bank account. No questions were asked. He purchased a ticket to Madrid and set about becoming Fat Charlie. Before leaving, he decided to try the pleasures of the flesh himself with the first willing companion. He made no qualms about his intentions and offered a bundle of notes to a young local in exchange for him being able to cross another thing off his list. The experience was brief, confusing and somewhat disappointing for both. Fat Charlie cleaned himself off and made his way to the bus station. A new life awaited. Madrid did little to please Fat Charlie. He ate, drank, screwed and engaged in various unsavory business dealings with predictable results. He was still new to the real world and lessons had to be learned quickly. One of his associates talked of a life of opportunities on the Costa del Sol, and Charlie, not keen to spend another Madrid winter, made the move south to further his education. The money from PG was running short by the time he started up in Malaga. He was asked to contribute something of the lion's share towards the costs of starting up the company. His partner's argument being that Charlie had been let in on the idea and his partner had done all the thinking. Charlie soon realized he was about to be unceremoniously ripped off, and sought advice to prevent this from happening. He found advice from a customer of theirs who made it clear that people thought Fat Charlie was an easy touch. The name Daft Charlie was even suggested by his partner, who delighted on the urine extraction possibilities of his partner. Charlie asked what he should do to address the situation, the answer coming as no surprise to him. The next time he saw his partner, Fat Charlie told him he wished to address certain matters that had been troubling. He then saw the return on the best investment he had made thus far, hiring 2 bouncers to help him prove his point. With the partner weeping all the way to the bank to return every last peseta, Charlie had learnt another important lesson in life. It can help if you are an utter cunt. Charlie spared the partner his life, though not his bad looks, and took the clientele. The bounces came to work for him. Now Charlie was established. In no time, established would become revered and feared, finally admired. Charlie knew that this admiration was false, fueled by fear, but it guaranteed that no one gave him any more shit. It was easy for Fat Charlie to build up his empire. The original Costa del Sol businessman, dealing in nothing in particular and everything in reality. He eventually got over the hatred and hang-ups he had with the rest of the world for PG's guilt. The only remnant being his aversion to personal hygiene as a result of the incident. Charlie knew the rules and limitations of the world he now inhabited, and, as a result, was soon integrated into the upper echelons of that society. Fear of a huge, smelly man with enormous friends working wonders for your social standing. Fat Charlie was into a little bit of everything. His favorite business dealings were in property, as there were more opportunities to be cunning, although the way he acted at times you may think that there was a T missing from the description. Drugs, theft, prostitution and extortion were also entertained, though Charlie preferred to think of himself as a business magnate rather than a common thief. Despite the social stigma at the less glamorous ends of the criminal scale, it was folly to suggest that the money was never welcome. Fat Charlie, though, did not enjoy dealing with the people involved in these rackets. He had delusions grandeur in the social scene, one day hoping his personality would match the vastness of his gut. Not that he particularly had an excessive amount of time for those whom he tried to impress, yet felt drawn towards their world, however false it may be. One of the problems of not belonging anywhere, he supposed. He needed to find someone who would do all the work he didn't like, perhaps even enjoying it, so that he could concentrate on properties and the acquisition of that item synonymous with ambiguity on the Costa businesses. It wasn't like Fat Charlie could put an ad in the Malaga Gazette. He had to be patient and wait for the right person to come to him. Fat Charlie believed that things happened for a reason and was ridiculously superstitious about pointless things. For example, if he woke up feeling good, he would not defecate until all his business dealings had been completed for the day, for fear that the good omens may slide from his frame along with the feces. When Rubben came to him, he took this as a sign and, despite looking back on a few occasions, never looked back. A quick news flash from our current affairs department informs me that you will now have the chance to see Fat Charlie in action. He has read my report and is none too convinced that Colvin and his delightful little scumbucket friends will stay on the shores of the United Kingdom and Great Britain, and our benefactor himself has decided to appear there in person to outline the possible consequences of the folly of revenge. Being on the ball, he knows Luton has an airport and wants to be in and out as fast as possible. I tell him that the airline that operates the Malaga Luton run may not be of the comfort levels he has become accustomed, but he is insistent, which means I am wrong, and we are booked on the next flight to Luton. It leaves in 3 hours. We arrive at that most cubist of airports, catalyst to so many enjoyable suntans and gratefully ended summer flings with hairdressers from Wakefield, our very own Pablo Picasso International, with just hand luggage, and are ushered through by a gentleman we know who works there into the departure lounge. They look like gangsters in their suits, and I look like Richard Attenborough after a nasty bout of gastroenteritis. Despite the airline's first come, first served policy, we are first on the plane. Then the problems begin. Fat Charlie travels in a helmet coal style, and normally a standard airline seat is insufficient. The seats on this difficult, for him, jet are too small. We manage to struggle him into 2, and I am left with a sort of unexpected child seat near the back of the plane. Still means I can read in peace and not have to listen to their conversation, which can, at times, become tedious. We arrive at Luton and are greeted by a waiting driver, thus avoiding the ignominy of passport control. Given the rushed nature of this job, we have had to provide our own equipment. This may be seen as problematic for meddlesome officers of customs, so it is best to get out of their airport with the least of fuss. Do not think that travelling on aeroplanes with guns makes us dangerous. We have no intention of any type of hijacking. We are not animals. Anyway, if someone did try to hijack the plane, then we would be there to sort out a potentially nasty situation. They should pay us to travel. I say we, but I mean they. We make a temporary base camp near the airport. Fat Charlie is not known for his hygiene, but that flight makes him desire a quick shower, even though he would put the same clothes back on. We stop at a hotel and check in using Colvin's name with some handy fake ID. We thank the driver and acquire a hired space with the same ID. I get my map out and we are soon on the road to Colvin's hovel. My photographic memory helps us there in no time, and, with a look of disgust, we prepare to enter. Dave knocks on the door, and, after an ungentlemanly wait, someone who failed to appear as Eminem stars in their eyes opens the door. This chap, it appears, has ready wit. No insurance today, gents. He says and begins laughing, pleased at his comic genius. The laughter stops when Dave, in a very swift movement for a big guy, takes him by the neck and lifts him off the ground. He pushes him into the house and we follow. A heft blow with his left boot on the door means that we are in the living room. There's a look of surprise as Dave releases his grip on the youngster and Fat Charlie begins the pleasantries. Good morning. You will probably have no idea who we are. That is by the by. We are the new employers of a certain quartet for whom you probably would be interested in a modicum of revenge. We are here to implore you not to pursue this line of action. Should you accept this situation, no harm will come to you. Fat Charlie smiled at Colvin and awaited a retort. You know where those fuckers are. They owe me. So that means you owe me. I want what's mine. Foolish words, from a fool. Forget about them. Whatever you learn about them will go in one ear and out the other, or I will kill you all. Still smiling, the big man. Balls. You don't have the bollocks for it. I can see you have the guts though. Very good. Tell me, Colvin, of these idiots you associate yourself with, would it pain you least to never see again? Fat Charlie was clearly no longer in the mood for debate. What do you mean? Well, of the people here there must be one that you care for less, one that you don't really like, or at least as much as the others. For example, my associates here are fine people and I have great respect for them, but at a push I could put them in order of how much I like them. That would mean I liked one less. So, which of the people here do you like less? I'm not saying that you don't like them, but that in the relative scheme of things you must have one, if you like, opposite of the teacher's pet. Do you get my drift? You could tell by now that Colvin was worried and wanted Fat Charlie out of the place. He would go along with this to hurry things up. He pointed to a rather unpleasant-looking thing on the couch, trying to make a bomb from a Coke can. Good, said Charlie. Now we understand each other. He gestured to Ruben, who extracted a pistol with a silencer. God. I love silencers, who shot the runt in the face, killing him instantly. Now Colvin was scared. Do we have an agreement? He repeated his inquiry. Colvin was not overly capable of speech, but the body language suggested they had an agreement. Now, I want to know I can trust you, so stand up. Colvin did so. Ruben and Dave stood behind him while John put his gun to the head of the nearest crony. Okay, Colvin, what I want you to do for me is prove that you are not lying. He walked behind him and held the gun to his side. None of the other cronies moved. If I can trust you, you will do something for me, won't you? Colvin nodded. Tears were forming. If you do this for me, then I will leave you with this little shithole to do with as you wish, though I can't see you lasting long. Maybe a group of schoolgirls will come and take your empire from you. I don't really care. All you have to do is one little thing for me. Shoot our little friend here in the leg. Then I will know I can trust you. Colvin pleaded, but knew deep down it was shoot a friend. Hell, this was business. People change from friends to acquaintances and back every 5 minutes, or be shot. He was still begging when his finger pulled on the trigger and the bullet entered the lad's leg just above the knee. The victim demonstrated signs of smarting in the area and began to make a terrible noise. Colvin fell to the floor shaking as we prepared to leave. The lad was now howling, and it was most off-putting. Dave had a word with him. What's the matter, son? He inquired with an almost fatherly nature. It fucking hurts so much, the lad said through gritted teeth. Well, maybe if you had something else to think about, then that would take your mind off the pain in your left leg. Oh God. Yes. He seemed to agree. With that, Dave shot him in the other leg. Now you can think about which leg hurts you more. You don't have to thank me. Bye, ladies. And then we were outside, in the car, and soon on the motorway to London, reasonably clear in the knowledge that we would never have to return to Luton. Racing down the motorway, we were soon in London. London with Fat Charlie means that certain things are required of his travelling company. He decides the itinerary and there is no debate on the topic. The route is always, first to Savile Row, by underground, which you are not allowed to call the metro, then we are all fitted for a new suit, the style and cloth for which he chooses. He also pays for it, so things are not so bad. After that we take tea at the Ritz and hit Harrods. I buy very little, a knick-knack or two for the wife and kids, though I have never really seen the attraction of Harrods. Must be me, I suppose, because the rest go mad and purchase pheasant soup and other delicacies in some slow and apocalyptical shopping mission before the meteorite strikes the earth. After that we check into the Savoy for the night and pick up the suits, which are to be worn as we attend that horrid restaurant in London, where the waiters are deliberately rude to you and the service is poor, something that causes endless hilarity for Fat Charlie. Then it is off to the West End to see Cats again, or something similar. It's not too unpleasant really, and I shouldn't complain. Usually work nights out are rather less cultured than this. Of course, all this culture cannot last forever, and as they spend the rest of the night in a Soho watering hole, I make my way back to the Savoy and phone my wife before retiring to a sleeping quarter of silly dimension, given that I am alone. Still, that is only until tomorrow, when I shall enjoy the home fires again. I confirm the flights for tomorrow: first class on BA, special seat for Charlie. The only way to travel. I have a look around the TV channels and the entertainment is easily evaluated by the fact that I was soon asleep.